I grew up in a hobbit house. Yep, a real-life hobbit house with a dirt roof and everything. If you don't know what a hobbit house is, imagine you take a hill, cut it in half, and then shove a house inside. I believe houses can tell us a lot about the people that live there. So what would my hobbit house say about me? Maybe that I'm short? Well, I am the shortest person in my family. But maybe the story that I would tell is one where I was destined to create my own path in life, and where being the house that stood out on the block was okay. I'm an architect that doesn't use technology to create self-sustaining net zero green buildings. Instead, I use cutting-edge technology to reveal hidden and forgotten stories of the past. Stories that have the capacity to help change the false narrative that the lives of enslaved people were hopeless, helpless, and unrewarding, to a more honest narrative, one of strength, courage, autonomy, and accomplishment. I'm confused as to how and why, in this day and age, people continue to dehumanize enslaved people and misrepresent the contributions they've made to American history. Efforts to recognize and acknowledge enslaved people and the contributions they've made, they don't feel sincere or adequate to me yet. Budgets, resources, and timelines for projects associated with enslaved people are significantly less than those reserved for their white slave owners. This isn't right, nor is it acceptable. If we truly valued the contributions that enslaved people have made to America, then we'd be eager to learn as much as possible about their lives. But today, we barely even know their names. Empathy, perspective, and acceptance are three crucial components to any outcome resulting in America being able to move forward in a positive way from the legacy of slavery. Slave houses and the stories they tell are safe places that allow all of us to heal as we reflect on the sacrifices of the past and the racism and inequalities that continue today. Enslaved people were multidimensional, complex human beings, just like you and me. They were mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, daughters, and sons. And they had families, and family is what gives us strength, no matter how you define your family. And their families lived in houses, just like our families do. And a slave house was like every other American home, a sacred place. A slave house was where enslaved people found strength. It's where I find strength. Each time I step into a slave house, I find an inner strength that emboldens and inspires me. To be honest, when I started, I wasn't exactly sure how slave houses were going to tell the stories of enslaved people, or even what stories they were going to tell. But I knew they were critical to my mission. So on September 12th of 2013, with only determination in my camera, I set out to do my first survey of a slave house, a day that would forever change my life. Standing in a slave house on a hot summer day, I could feel the immense heat from outside. As I ducked down to walk through the door, I immediately noticed the low ceiling. It took a few seconds for my eyes to adjust to the dark space, because there's only one window. As I felt the small space close in all around me, I looked around the room and I asked myself, how did they cook? Where did they sleep? And how did people find privacy? And then I thought to myself, when and where were children conceived in this one-room, multi-family house? Minnie Davis's family shared their slave house in Georgia with 3 other families. There's a bed in each corner of the room, and 1 to 3 children slept in the bed with their parents, while the rest of the children slept on the floor. A slave house simultaneously embodies suffering, yet perseverance, and strong family bonds. For example, Mary Barber's house symbolized suffering. Mary's mother had 16 children. When asked, how did 18 people all fit into a one-room house? She sadly responded, when each child turned 3 years old, the slave owner would take them away from her mother and sell them. When freedom came, Mary's mother only had 4 children left: Mary, Henry, Liza, and Charlie. Sevilla Burrell's house demonstrated perseverance. The chimney in Sevilla's one-room log house was made of sticks and mud. One winter day, the walls of the chimney caught fire and burnt a big hole in the back of it. She remembers the wind was strong that day, so her house quickly filled with sparks, ashes, and smoke. It took many weeks before her family had time to collect new materials, tear down the burnt chimney, and build a new one. Vinnie Busby's house represented strong family bonds. Vinnie's mother and father were not owned by the same man. So at night, Vinnie's father would sneak off his plantation to come visit Vinnie and her siblings. When the slave owner would come around, Vinnie's father would hide in the chimney flue. But when he couldn't make it to his hiding spot fast enough, and he'd be caught, he'd be beaten so severely, there'd be a trail of blood leading all the way back to his plantation. Vinnie said her father would keep coming around to see them, and he'd keep taking the beatings. How and when we tell these stories matter. Each slave house has a valuable story to tell. The more stories you identify and experience, the more empathy you will have. The opportunity for documenting slave houses is rapidly closing, as now more than 150 years old, these buildings are disappearing. With the use of technology, in only 4 years, I've been able to document approximately 700 buildings at over 140 sites across 6 states in the US. 27% of these buildings have been demolished, and another 5% have been abandoned, so soon they too will disappear from the landscape. The opportunity to speak with and learn from formerly enslaved people came and went during a time when there was little interest in collecting their knowledge and unique viewpoint. I want to make sure we don't make the same mistake twice and let the buildings that encapsulate their untold stories disappear before revealing as much insight as possible. By nature, the institution of slavery was largely intended to be invisible, resulting in minimal historical records. But if you do some digging, you will find that there is information about enslaved people out there, just not always where you'd expect it to be, and never is it a complete picture. Technology has made access to all these fragmented pieces more widely available, revealing never-before-made relationships. This example demonstrates what it looks like when multiple pieces of information do fit together and just how incredibly rare that is. The Historic American Building Survey, or HABS, and the Federal Writers Project were 2 large-scale government programs in the 1930s that in part documented slavery in America. HABS documented the architecture and created a graphic representation of a site, while the Writers Project collected American life histories from formerly enslaved people. Of the 485 sites that have a HABS documented slave house and the 1,010 slave narrative, Writers Project narratives that describe their house during slavery, only 5 sites from the HABS collection can be directly linked to an ex-slave narrative recorded by the Writers Project. My favorite example of the 5 matched sites is the Taylor Plantation in Alabama. It's a rare HABS site that can be matched to the ex-slave narrative of Jane Holloway. The site is also exceptional because not only is there a narrative about life on the Taylor Plantation, but a picture of Jane was also taken during the interview, and it still survives. Jane's narrative and the site provide insight into what it was like for enslaved people living on a small plantation. During slavery, Jane lived with her mother, Carrie, her father, Taylor, and her brother, Maryland. They lived in a 1-room log house. Jane remembers that the house itself wasn't very large, but the fireplace was. Recalling the size of the fireplace made Jane think of spending time with her family, the meals they ate together, and how precious these times were for her while she was growing up. Green Hill Plantation demonstrates how technology has helped shape our understanding, interpretation, and sharing capabilities of the built environment. Having a physical space to experience is one of the best ways to help people grapple with some of the complexities and harsh conditions that slavery imposed. Unfortunately, many people won't have the opportunity to do this in person. 66% of the sites I've surveyed are privately owned. Although the property owners have been very gracious and accommodating to open their sites up to me for my research, it's unrealistic to expect them to operate like a public site. But thanks to technology, fieldwork can be translated into virtual reality experiences so anyone and everyone can learn from and experience a slave house. Green Hill Plantation is located in Campbell County, Virginia. It's a valuable historic site to study because many of the original structures still survive. It was established by Samuel Pennell in 1796. Samuel Pennell was a slave breeder, trader, and auctioneer. And for these reasons, he felt it was necessary to have a slave auction block right outside his door. The auction block is constructed of thick slabs of stone. It is 3 feet square and stands 3 feet off the ground. Looking at it, you can feel the immense weight of the platform bearing down on its 4 posts. Standing on top of the auction block, you immediately feel exposed and powerless. The auction block is situated so that it is visible from every building that would have surrounded the main house. This would have included at least 4 slave houses and 3 workspaces. It was there to remind enslaved people they could be separated from their family and sold at any time and for any reason. And for too many mothers, it was a constant reminder of the time their babies were ripped from their arms and sold to the highest bidder, never to be reunited. It was the first thing enslaved people saw when they left their houses in the morning. They passed by it each time they went to the main house, and it's the last thing they saw before going into their houses at night. The surviving slave house is the only one left of 4 that once stood in the yard. Although there was ample stone on the property to build with, so much so, the roadways and garden walls were constructed with it. The slave houses were not. Only their chimneys were built of stone. The houses themselves were wood. The existing slave house is approximately 20 feet by 16 feet, or 320 square feet, roughly the size of a 1-car garage. It has 2 exterior doors and 1 historic window. Like many slave houses I've been in, the ladder stairs tucked away in the corner to maximize usable floor space. But by doing this, it makes them incredibly hard to access. They're also difficult to climb because they have very narrow treads and extra tall risers. In 1861, at the time of Pennell's death, there were 223 enslaved people farming 5,000 acres of land and caring for all the people and animals living on it. This is 223 stories waiting to be told. The next time you encounter a slave house, don't view it as just another building on this landscape. Instead, recognize that it is an irreplaceable piece of history that embodies the suffering of Mary Barber, the perseverance of Sevilla Burrell, and the strong family bonds of Vinnie Busby, along with the hundreds and thousands of other enslaved people that sacrificed, contributed to, and helped build America. Let slave houses and the stories they encapsulate remind you to take opportunities to learn about others with an open mind and an open heart. And remember, the only thing that makes us different, remember that we are all human beings, and the only thing that makes us different from one another is how we choose to treat each other. Doing so will help in other aspects of life, help us understand what's going on in the world today, and help us move forward in a positive way from the legacy of slavery. Thank you.